Hello, welcome to episode 3. I'm on campus, but it's totally empty. There's no one in sight, which is good. I'm glad everyone's socially isolating. I'm just on my way to an isolated office that no one else goes into, so I'm doing my part. I haven't come within 6 feet of anybody. I've just never seen it so empty. I heard on the radio that not only has Boston shut down all bars and dining restaurants, but they're also shutting down all construction sites for 2 weeks. And they said that it's going to be like 10,000 construction sites. It's just so strange. Okay, but remember, Descartes is not trying to tell us the physical world isn't real. He's not trying to argue that the coronavirus isn't real, or that your life isn't real. He's trying to say that we should recognize that there's a shred of doubt in these things. Okay, so episode 3 is the beginning of the second meditation. The first 2 episodes covered the first meditation, in which Descartes introduces the method of doubt, sets us on the quest for foundations of certainty, and introduces the dreaming argument and the omnipotent deceiver or evil demon argument. So then the mission in the second meditation is to see if anything can be known with certainty if we assume that we're being deceived by an omnipotent being. So the tacit assumption is that by introducing a deceiver god, an omnipotent deceiver, we have reached basically the farthest reaches of the method of doubt. It's like there's nothing that can be doubted beyond what you can doubt by presupposing that you're being deceived by God about everything that God can possibly deceive you about. So then here we get the statement of skepticism, where he says, what then can be esteemed as true? Perhaps nothing at all, unless that there is nothing in the world that is certain. So skepticism is the view that there's no knowledge. And then returning to that theme that I introduced at the end of the last video, is this the same thing as saying that nothing is true or that there's no such thing as reality? It can be a little confusing because he says, what can be esteemed as true? You might think that he's saying nothing is true, but really what he's talking about is that there's nothing that we can be justified in believing is true. That's the statement of skepticism. He's saying perhaps there's nothing at all that we can be justified in believing except that we're not justified in believing anything, that there's nothing in the world that's certain. Maybe I shouldn't say justified in believing. Really the issue is nothing can be known. But now, having broached the possibility of absolute skepticism, of the view that we can't know anything at all, or maybe the view that we can only know one thing, which is that we can't know anything else, Descartes says, but how can I know that there's not something different from those things which I've just considered, of which one cannot have the slightest doubt? So he's saying, sure, I've ruled out a lot of stuff, and I've said I can't know any of this stuff with absolute certainty, but couldn't there still be something which I do know with absolute certainty? So now we finally get to the moment where he sort of argues for the foundationalist view that he has. So at this point, Descartes gives his most famous argument, probably, arguably. called the cogito. Although it's not given in its most famous form in the book that we're reading. So in the Meditations, he doesn't say, I think, therefore I am.
Cogito ergo sum. That's where the name of the argument comes from.
But the thrust of the argument is pretty much the same as that. The idea is that we find certainty in reflecting on the fact that I must be some kind of a thinking being. So I'm going to take us through the version of the argument that's in the second meditation, and I'm going to ask that we all understand it very clearly in the form that it's presented and not sort of conflate it with the other famous version that appears in a different place in Descartes' canon. Okay, so I've made a drawing to illustrate the argument. Okay, so here's the setup. We've got this being, who's this omnipotent demon type character, who's beaming images into the mind of this person. And I want to point out that the symbolic representation includes like a face, but you probably don't, I mean, who knows, but you don't have a face necessarily. You might just be a thinking being of the type that just has images in a mind or something like that. So the face part is just to remind you that it's a person, I guess. Okay, so then there's two possibilities that Descartes considers. It says either there's some kind of omnipotent being, some God type being that's deceiving me, in which case I must exist so that I'm being deceived. Or maybe I am the thing which is deceiving myself. So maybe these are really just one being. And again, in that case, I must exist to be doing and receiving the deception. So either I'm being deceived by some other being or I'm being deceived by myself, but in either case, I must exist. And so that's the version of the cogito that is presented in the Meditations. Okay, now here are the slides going over this argument, taking text from the Meditation. So, is there not some God or some other being, whatever name we may call it, who puts these reflections into my mind? That's not necessary, for it's not excuse me. Is it not possible that I am capable of producing them myself? I myself am not at least something. So that's the scenario in which these are just one being, you, and you're just doing it to yourself. But I was persuaded that there was nothing in all the world, that there was no heaven, no earth, that there are no minds, nor any bodies. Was I not then likewise persuaded that I did not exist? Not at all. Of a surety, I myself did exist, since I persuaded myself of something. So, at least something must have existed. Now he says, suppose there's some deceiver or other, not you are the one that is doing it, but some other being, very powerful and cunning, whoever employs his ingenuity in deceiving me, then without doubt I exist, if he also deceives me. And let him deceive me as much as he will, he can never cause me to be nothing, so long as I think that I am something. So long as I'm thinking that I'm something, I can't not exist, because something must be doing the thinking. So I'm being deceived that there's a car, that there's a tree, when in fact there's nothing except for these minds. Maybe there's two minds, maybe there's one mind. But one thing I can be completely sure of is that I exist. Now the thing that we're going to turn to next time, in the next video, the last video for Descartes, is looking at the sort of things that are going on in here. So just to give you a preview, since I want to make use of this great drawing. So the idea is that even though I can be deceived about there being an external world, I can't be deceived about what's in my own mind. So I can be deceived that there are actually trucks and trees and cars out in the external world, but I can't be deceived that I am experiencing those things in my mind. The most that the deceiver can do is just give me the images. Okay, so what seems to be happening is that I'm over here and I'm seeing these things that are outside of me. That this is the world beyond my own mental life. And I have a window into that external world, But now we're imagining that I'm actually being deceived, and so this thing doesn't even exist. This isn't there. So there is no external world. So I'm wrong where I think that there is something going on in the external world, but can I be wrong that I'm experiencing this external world? So whatever is going on in my mind, the idea is I can't be deceived about that. So if I'm having an image, a mental image, within my mind, then I can know with 100% certainty that I'm experiencing that thing, even if I'm being deceived by myself or some other being. Okay, so that's a preview. We're going to talk more about what thinking is and what the foundations of knowledge are in the next video. So before I turn it all the way off here, I just want to give you the breakdown on the slides of what this argument looks like. So this is the cogito argument as it's given in the second meditation. It's got these 4 premises. Assume that I'm being deceived about everything I could possibly doubt. Then either A, I'm being deceiving myself, or B, some other being is deceiving me. But in A, I have to exist to do the deceiving. In B, I must exist so that I can be deceived. Therefore, in either case, I exist, so I exist. So it's an argument by disjunction. Now, I just want to point out that this is a more complex argument than just saying I exist, therefore I am. That argument is not the one that's being given here. So if I ask you on a test to explain the cogito as it occurs in the meditations, don't just put down I think, therefore I am, because that's losing the complexity of this argument. By the way, I have to point out that in this drawing, the brain represents the idea that the demon is affecting your brain. This is a reference to the 20th/21st century version of the argument, which imagines that there's an evil scientist, mad genius brain scientist that's affecting your brain, who's like feeding images into your brain, like in the Matrix. They're manipulating your brain so that you see things that not there. But this is a little confusing because in the true Cartesian version of the argument, you don't know that you have a brain. You don't know that you have a body at all. So it's confusing to put a brain in the picture in a certain sense. Okay, so here is the statement of the conclusion. He says, so that after having reflected well and carefully examined all things, we must come to the definite conclusion that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it or that I mentally conceive it. Just a couple things to note about this. First, it only works when you're actually doing the reflecting. So it's not that you know for all time that you permanently exist or something. It's just that whenever you think about it, whenever you mentally conceive it or pronounce it in your mind, when you pronounce the argument, I am a thinking being, I think, therefore I am. I exist. Whenever you think those thoughts, they must be true, because whatever is doing the thinking, the I, must exist in order to think those things. So you say, I think, I exist. I know without a doubt that those statements are true in my mind as I think them. It doesn't really give you the guarantee that you continue to exist when you're not thinking, though. So there's this question that Descartes raises, sort of, do we exist when we're not thinking? And the answer is going to end up being no. You only exist as long as you're thinking, because that's what you are. You're a thinking being. Okay, again, talk about that more next time.